I did as he told me, and I saw what he meant. I felt like nothing, and at the same time, I had never felt so big and great in all my life. I forgot all my anger and all my tears and all the blows. When I said that I was better, he began telling me the names of the stars, and I particularly remember the constellation of the Orion the Hunter, though I don't really know why. I can spot Orion even today, but I have forgotten the rest. Then a light was flashed in our faces, and we saw a policeman. We got up from the grass. The policeman said, "What you doing here?" B. Wordsworth said, "I have been asking myself the same question for 40 years. We became friends, B. Wordsworth and I. He told me, you must never tell anybody about me and about the mango tree and the coconut tree and the plum tree. You must keep that a secret. If you tell anybody, I will know, because I am a poet." I gave him my word and I kept it. I liked his little room. It had no more furniture than George's front room, but it looked cleaner and healthier, but it looked lonely. One day I asked him, "Mr. Wordsworth, why you does keep all this bush in your yard? Ain't it does make the place damp?" He said, "Listen, and I will tell you a story. Once upon a time, a boy and girl met each other and they fell in love. They loved each other so much they got married. They were both poets. He loved words, she loved grass and flowers and trees. They lived happily in a single room, and then one day the girl poet said to the boy poet, "We are going to have another poet in the family." But this poet was never born, because the girl died, and the young poet died with her inside her. And the girl's husband was very sad, and he said he would never touch a thing in the girl's garden, and so the garden remained and grew high and wild. I looked at B. Wordsworth, and as he told me this lovely story, he seemed to grow older. I understood his story. He went for long walks together. We went to the botanical gardens and the rock gardens. We climbed Chancellor Hill in the late afternoon and watched the darkness fall on Port of Spain, and watched the lights go on in the city and on the ships in the harbor. He did everything as though he were doing it for the first time of his life. He did everything as though he were doing some church rite. He would say to me, "Now how about having some ice cream?" And when I said yes, he would grow very serious and say, "Now which cafe shall we patronize?" As though it were a very important thing. He would think for some time about it and finally say, "I think I will go and negotiate the purchase with that shop." The world became a most exciting place. One day, when I was in his yard, he said to me, "I have a great secret which I am now going to tell you." I said, "It really secret?" At the moment, yes. I looked at him. He looked at me. I said, "This is just between you and me. Remember, I am writing a poem." "Oh," I disappointed. He said, "But this is a different sort of poem. This is the greatest poem in the world." I whistled. He said, "I have been working on it for more than 5 years now. I will finish it in about 22 years from now. That is, if I keep on writing at the present rate." "You does write a lot then," he said. "Not anymore. I just write one line a month. But I make sure it is a good line." I asked, "What was last month's good line. He looked up at the sky and said, "The past is deep." I said, "It is a beautiful line." B. Wordsworth said, "I hope to distill the experiences of a whole month into that single line of poetry. So, in 22 years, I shall have written a poem that will sing to all humanity." I was fulfilled with wonder. Our walks continued. We walked along the sea wall at Dockside one day, and I said, "Mr. Wordsworth, if I drop this pin in the water, you think it will float?" He said, "This is a strange world. Drop your pin and let us see what will happen." The pin sank. I said, "How is the poem this month?" But he never told me another line. He merely said, "Oh, it comes, it comes." Or we would sit on the sea wall and watch the liners come into the harbor. But of the greatest poem in the world I heard no more. I felt he was growing older. "How you does live, Mr. Wordsworth?" I asked him one day. He said, "You mean how I get money?" When I nodded, he laughed in a crooked way. He said, "I sing calypsos in the calypso season, and that last you the rest of the year. It is enough. But you will be the richest man in the world when you write the greatest poem." He didn't reply. One day when I went to see him in his little house, I found him lying on his little bed. He looked so old and so weak that I found myself wanting to cry. He said, "The poem is not going well." He wasn't looking at me. He was looking through the window at the coconut tree, and he was speaking as though I wasn't there. He said, "When I was 20, I felt the power within myself. Then almost in front of my eyes, I could see his face growing older and more tired." He said, "But that was a long time ago." And then I felt it so keenly. It was as though I had been slapped by my mother. I could see it clearly on his face. It was there for everyone to see. Death on this shrinking face. He looked at me and saw my tears and sat up. He said, "Come." I went and sat on his knees. He looked into my eyes and he said, "Oh, you can see it too. I always knew you had the poet's eye." He didn't even look sad, and that made me burst out crying loudly. He pulled me to his thin chest and said, "Do you want me to tell you a funny story?" And he smiled encouragingly at me, but I couldn't reply. He said, "When I have finished this story, I want you to promise that you will go away and never come back to see me. Do you promise?" I nodded. He said, "Good. Well, listen. That story I told you about the boy poet and the girl poet, do you remember that? That wasn't true. It was something I just made up. All this talk about poetry and the greatest poem in the world, that wasn't true either. Isn't that the funniest thing you have heard?" But his voice broke. I felt the house and ran home crying like a poet for everything I saw. I walked along Alberto Street a year later, but I could find no sign of the poet's house. It hadn't vanished just like that. It had been pulled down, and a big two-storied building had taken its place. The mango tree and the palm tree and the coconut tree had all been cut down, and there was brick and concrete everywhere. It was just as though B. Wordsworth had never existed.